Helheim! Welcome to Rauta! Today's topic is Helheim from Norway, one of the early wave of Norwegian black metal bands. And why I decided to feature this particular band is because, well, they released a rather new album already this fall 2021. And that kind of brought me back to my favorite Helheim album, the very first one, Jormundgand. Now, Jormundgand is a mythical creature related to Viking metal myths and legends, or Asatru, and that kind of ties to the very themes of the band, having a lot of Viking features in their music since the very beginning. So, against or versus so many bands that were operating with more satanic themes or darkness or even Tolkien-like themes, Helheim was one of the early birds to go with the Viking themes. But their music, especially the very first one, has always been one of the kind of a cornerstone style of Norwegian black metal bands. And what is more important, I think, is that their very first album is indeed one of the classics of Norwegian black metal. I mean, of course, there are a lot of bands that are really good and who have been making the whole Norwegian black metal to what it actually is. But there are still some albums that often are, in my opinion, kind of overlooked versus the bigger bands that got more successful and all that stuff. And often it seems Helheim is one of those bands that people don't mention when they're talking about old Norwegian black metal. So here we have Helheim on Metal Archives on the background, while I'll tell you a little bit more about the album. Now, before we go into the debut album from 1995, which wasn't exactly one of the earliest albums out there, I mean, compared to what the band was already out in 1992, or founded back then, and then a couple of demos featured soon after, but they kind of missed the very, very early years versus bands like, Dark Throne, Ember, etc. And as such, they came a little bit late to the party, but still before, I would say, a lot of bands start to go in decline. Some people say it started around 1995, some would say it's more like 1997, but let's face it, the early 1990s, that was the golden era for a lot of bands, before people started to mature or experiment with maybe too much. I mean, maybe I don't need even the list, and that goes beyond the scope of this review. So we're here to talk about Jormundgand, and since that, as you can see, a lot of albums have come out by Helheim, and they have been a little bit different style. Of course, the next album, Up Northern Et, already kind of paved the way for the next albums, and by no means who I am to say, or anybody to say that they shouldn't have not changed the style. But what matters to me is that Jormundgand stood out as one of the different bands or albums back then. I mean, it had these really wild vocals, which I hope you can hear on the background. And they also had some killer songwriting on this album. I mean, it's not only raw black metal, fierce, grim, evil, and fast tempo, but it also has these beautiful kind of atmospheric parts. Their synthesizers are used in fantastical ways. In my opinion, even better than most of the bands coming from the genre. There are really, really great ideas here and there, which you can just hear when you go on with the album. And then there are lots of killer riffs. So, really good album. But towards the end, I must say, it's not as good. Especially the kind of outro thing of the album. It gets a little bit kind of lost in a way. But especially the early parts of the album, I would say roughly the first 5 songs or so, and even more, I would guess, Vigrid's Word as the second track. I mean, it's just fantastic. Like I said, there are killer riffs, there are lots of good melodies, there are these crazy but super cool vocals. I guess they're not for everybody. I mean, they are so high-pitchy scream that they put Danny Field, shame of his kind of a unique singing style. So I like them because they are different, and they are kind of inhuman, and they are something like atypical Norwegian black metal or any kind of black metal vocals out there, so they really stand out from the rest. And the production is solid. So why this is so important for me is not only because it stands out as unique in Helheim's own discography, but because it also can kind of put up a fight against those other bands. I mean, it has its own ways of doing riffs. Certainly, it can be boxed into the very same genre as a lot of Norwegian black metal bands, or even Sweden, etc. But there is something that kind of ties these more Viking-like themes. Different than Bathory's for sure, different even from Enslaved, but yet at the same time I feel there's kind of a kinship between Helheim, early Borknagar, and Enslaved. Of course they all, then changed their style and became more, I guess, progressive in a way. They started to incorporate clean vocals even more, change their style into something softer and all that stuff. But at the same time, Jormundgand has something similar going on than, Enslaved had with Frost, which is also very intense, very black metal kind of album, even though the topics are more about Viking myths and creatures and etc. related to that. And also the early Borknagar. So all these three have something different in common. They could be carved from the same tree, but they are not, or at least the very place of the tree, the very spot on the tree is very different. And as such, as the result, these bands are able to sound very, very fierce, grim, and unique at the same time while being boxed into something called Norwegian black metal. So for me, Jormundgand, and I know that I'm not actually the only one, there's at least one colleague who thinks very much the same about this album being the best of Helheim, not only because it's more black metallic than the rest of the discography, but also because it's very, very innovative in songwriting and sounding unique as a result. Synths, clean vocals, mouth harp, etc. I still go back to this album every now and then, and I feel that it's as great nowadays as it was in the 1990s. So it's not so much about nostalgia bonus, which then again is true with some of the albums by various bands. But when I go for Helheim and the debut album, I feel like, yes, this is the kind of a 1990s magic that no band can actually get going anymore. And yet at the same time, there are lots of bands that are less kind of a timeless, which are more like results of the given time. So Jormungand is my pick for this week's classic. Go check it out and enjoy those crazy vocals. It's a really, really good album and definitely worth your time. Thanks for checking out the review. Check out the links for music provided. You can find pretty much all the Helheim music on their Bandcamp site and obviously streaming services. So go check it out. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.